Good afternoon, good evening, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Innovators Circle. I am very delighted to have a colleague and a friend with me this evening, Eric Piscini. Eric and I have been colleagues in other positions that we've held throughout our careers, and he is now the CEO of a company called Hashgraph. I know that's an interesting name, and we're going to get into the background around Hashgraph. But we really want to delve this evening into the area of blockchain. And clearly, with so much going on in the current White House administration, with its focus on cryptocurrency and blockchain, this is a very keen area that we want to explore and understand more. And Eric is going to help us to demystify, if you will, some aspects of blockchain. I'm going to just describe in a moment a little bit of a setup, but then we're going to go into aspects of innovation, leading businesses, business models, collaboration models, leadership, and what it is really impacting in terms of the impact that blockchain is having on new business models, the new sorts of open source collaboration models that are being enabled, and the leadership skills that are called upon when you are leading in an emerging kind of technology area. How do you find talent? How do you lead people? How do you look around corners? So that's some of what we're going to be talking about today. So Eric, my understanding is you've been in the technology sector for most of your career. You were at Deloitte, now you're at Hashgraph. And my understanding is that Hashgraph is a key player in an area that we call Hedera, the Hedera aspects of the blockchain. And it, in and of itself, is a very innovative way of designing, developing, and continuing to innovate, if you will, the blockchain. So I think that for our viewers, first, it would be really helpful to understand a little bit more if you could break down some of the nomenclature. What is blockchain? How does Hedera and Hashgraph fit into blockchain? And then maybe we could look forward to some of the use cases that we're all familiar with. For me, who has a very naive experience in blockchain, I think about the financial sector services, how it's enabling cryptocurrency. So let me just toss that one over to you. And we just love to hear you give us some of your explanation and insights.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. And first, thank you for having me. You and I talked about a lot of different innovation ideas over the years, and I'm so happy to be able to talk to you live on LinkedIn here. So thank you for having me. Maybe what we start with is, if you look at 2008, the beginning of Bitcoin, right? Well, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, and like every other cryptocurrency, the Bitcoin is using a technology called blockchain. And then blockchain is just a way to record information, transaction being made between different parties exchanging cryptocurrencies, right? So that was the very beginning of blockchain, right? And by the way, the word blockchain did not exist at the beginning. That word came around, I think it was 2014, when we started using the word blockchain to explain what Bitcoin was doing. Because at that time, many other solutions were leveraging the same concept of blockchain to create their own version, right? And you have a lot of different projects that started to be built on the top of the same idea of exchanging value between two parties without the need of a third party in the middle. And Hedera was started in 2018, was a product of that evolution, right? But the difference with Hedera is that it is a very efficient and very cheap platform to use, as opposed to the other blockchain before Hedera. So Hedera, think of it as a version of a blockchain that's using a cryptocurrency like almost every other blockchain, but a very efficient and very business-friendly blockchain. And we can talk about why is that in a minute. But that's, I think, the way you need to think about it. And when you think of blockchain, think of the backend IT of a business platform. Like you think of cloud being the backend infrastructure, blockchain is the backend of the value exchange of a business process. And it could be a cryptocurrency exchange, but it could be a lot of other things.
Okay, terrific. And within that context, Eric, we talk about the decentralized ledger technology. Can you explain how that fits in as well?
Yeah, so we're going to go through all the dictionary terms, right, around blockchain, but DLT, decentralized ledger technology, is the encompassing word for all the different flavors of blockchain, right? And some of them have a cryptocurrency associated with them for a lot of technical reasons, and some of them don't have a need for a cryptocurrency. And so when we ended up in that world where you had two different types of blockchains and many other flavors, we started saying DLT instead, because all of them are decentralized platform. All of them operate as a ledger recording transactions, and all of them are technology platforms. So that was the umbrella word for all the blockchain solutions in the space. And then you had Web3, which is the next word on the dictionary of blockchain. And Web3 includes not only those platforms, but every application and every process, most of them financial process, built around those technologies, right? So within Web3, you have decentralized finance, DeFi. You have a lot of different components to this. But Web3 is the entire world where people can use those technologies to exchange value between each other without the need of a third party in the middle, which is a real innovation here.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you for all of that setup. That's really helpful. Is there anything in particular that you want to cover in terms of Hashgraph and the work that you're doing before we start to talk about? Okay, let's do that, and then we'll talk about the ability of blockchain to disrupt business models and what you're seeing.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so Hashgraph is the team who's actually behind the Hedera network, right? So the Hedera network is the technology itself, and it's also, which is very, very unique in the world of blockchain, a governing council. So you have 30 plus companies together who are running the network, the decentralized network, for the Hedera solution, so with the Hedera technology. Those companies are really big organizations: Google, IBM, Dell, LG, and many, many, many others. But huge organizations who have decided to put their credibility into that program, into that platform, because they believe in it. They believe it's going to change the way they operate, the way they go to market, the way they generate value. So that's the first piece that is very important, because Hedera Cancel is very different from any other blockchain you can think of. And then we at iGraph are working on the technology, the product, everything that actually is needed for Hedera to succeed, right? So we are dedicated to Hedera. That's on the only thing we do. And we make sure that the platforms, the Cancel and the network, are successful. And then two more things about Hashgraph as a technology, because the technology is also the name, Hashgraph is also the name of the technology behind Hedera. The technology has been implemented in a way that is extremely business friendly, like I said earlier, because when you transact on our platform, you always have a guarantee on the costs of using that platform. You know how much it's going to cost you to use the platform ahead of time. In other blockchains, that's not the case. The cost of using the platform changes every day based on the underlying value of the cryptocurrency that is used by that platform. And we are very different for that. And that's also very important, because those two things help us become the business platform, a platform where enterprise are really ready to engage, because they trust the brands, they trust the technology, and they trust the cost of the platform.
Okay, so it makes it very consistent and understandable, and kind of the infrastructure is stable. A lot of
and predictable.
predictable. Yeah,
that's the key. Yeah.
So, Eric, tell us, what can we do with this technology now that we know that you're at the forefront of Hedera? A lot of companies in the council are advocating for this. It's a much more new and improved and innovative version of the blockchain. What can companies use it for?
So maybe I'll bucket that into three big things, right? The first thing is you can use blockchain technologies to enable financial flows, right? So payments, for example. You can do a payment scheme on the top of a blockchain platform, including Adera, and you can deliver a solution that is extremely light, but also very trusted. So I'll give you an example. In some countries where the adoption of the banking system is very low, people don't have a bank account. Some countries in the world are using blockchain instead to be the trusted layer of payments. And so people pay with each other on their phone. They don't need a bank account. They have a wallet on their phone where they keep the currency and they exchange that currency real time between each other. They don't need anyone to be part of that transaction, the bank or a local payment processor or any of that. That's actually real time between the individuals. That's a really good tool for financial inclusion, for example, right? So the first use case is usually what people think about is around payment and financial flows, right? Over the last 2 years now, we've been working on stablecoin. I'm sure you heard about this notion of stablecoin, which is a cryptocurrency representing a very stable asset, which is why it's called stablecoin. USDC is one of the largest in the US. And when you exchange a USDC, it's exactly the same as when you exchange a US dollar, except you can do that peer-to-peer in seconds across the internet, instead of either finding each other in person and exchanging dollar bills or trusting a bunch of third parties to make sure that money moves from my account to your account. So that's stablecoin is actually a really good example of blockchain. So first bucket, financial flows. The second bucket, I would say, is what I would call supply chain, but it's a lot of things in supply chain, right? It's the ability to track activities on a platform. So for example, we are working with Hyundai and Kia, the car manufacturers, and they track the activities of their suppliers and themselves on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. So anytime there is an event associated with a part, associated with an assembly, transporting the part, transporting the car, finalizing the car, anytime there is an event, they record that activity on the blockchain. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the chain, the supply chain, they actually know the carbon footprint of that car from the very beginning all the way to the end. And when you want to offset your carbon footprint, you can actually know how much you're going to have to pay to buy a carbon credit, for example, to offset that footprint, because now you actually know that value for that car that you're paying. Not really applicable at the individual level, but at the enterprise level, yes, because many organizations did commit to carbon neutrality and they can offset the carbon footprint when they buy a fleet of cars, for example. Mm-hmm. Blockchain can deliver a lot of value here because you don't have to trust Hyundai, you don't have to trust one of the supplier. Mm-hmm. They all trust each other through that platform, right? So that's a trust layer of supply chain. Mm-hmm. And then you have many other examples, but the one I like is about customer engagement, for example. So we have completely outside of the business world, but we have a company what we work with called Karate Combat, where people can bet and engage with the fighters as they fight and get rewards and points associated with that fight in real time. When they win the bet, really. So that's an interesting way to use blockchain as well. And the reason it's interesting is because it's a trust layer again. You trust that platform to monitor the outcome of the fight, the activity of the fight, the bets, and the payment of the proceeds. And all of that is based on a single platform. So very, very different use cases, very, very different, but always based on this notion of the trust layer when it comes to exchanging value, whether it's money, whether it's data, whether it's engagement and loyalty points.
Very good. So the common thread is the trust And also, I guess that just direct access, and maybe that's what relates to the trust, right? There aren't other stakeholders that you're wondering what they're doing or what their role is, or, like in so many other business models where you have a lot of players in that supply chain, you've just got direct relationship, which allows you a lot more control.
Yeah, and I think it's also, you don't have to trust one of the party. You can share information between the different parties without the need to say you will be in charge, and we are all going to trust you, right? Instead of doing that, you say we are trusting each other, and that technology that we all use, you have to use the technology, will provide that level of trust that we need.
Yeah. A question just came in from one of our viewers asking, are there certain industries that you think benefit more than others from blockchain? You mentioned finances, but are there other, major industries that are really well suited? And maybe this kind of leads into our discussion of business models and disruption.
Yeah, I think supply chain is a really good one because it's been involved into different adoption level of blockchain over the last 10 years. And so you have seen success stories, you've seen failures as well. We are talking about innovation, but supply chain is a really good, and it's an easy way to explain the value, right? When you have many parties sharing data in real time with each other without the need of saying one of us is going to be the trusted center of data. That's a really good case for a supply chain event. So supply chain is usually very easy. But if you look at the killer app for blockchain, I would say stablecoin is a killer app today. That's the most adopted solution in the world today on a blockchain platform. And then the next one is going to be AI, right? We haven't talked about AI, but we are doing a lot of work with different parties, different startups. And we are saying when an AI agent or anything in the supply chain of AI, from data sourcing to the modeling, to the learning, to the outcome, to the use of that outcome, all of that, if you record this on a trusted layer, again, trusted layer, blockchain, then you can guarantee that that AI is not going rogue on you, on us as a human species. You can actually record the information along the way. That's a really other very interesting case that we are.
And that's still evolving, I would imagine, right? Because there's
It is, yeah.
interesting. So that could help with tracking hallucinations and making sure that the AI signals and the information that it's sharing is more accurate, I suppose.
It's not as much about the accuracy of the model because that's actually a model issue. It's about the capturing of the events. So if you want to go back and say, hold on, something is weird with this outcome. The answer from that model is, I don't know if I can trust that. You can actually ask the platform to say, where is the data coming from? And the platform is not going to lie because it's actually recorded on a blockchain platform. And what kind of model did you use? And for how long did you use the model? Because it's also important. How many parameters do you use in your model? All of this information is captured along the way, so you can increase the trust value of whatever the AI is telling you. Right?
So would it be a company that would be interested in using blockchain for that if they're using AI inside of the organization? Or give me an example of who would want to track the AI like at that large of a scale.
So for example, content provider, so media organizations are using a lot of AI today. We all know that. But they want to make sure that they can have I'm going to call that an audit trail of what an AI is doing. And by using our technology, they can actually confirm that, right? So if they have a question at the end of the process, they can always go back and say, oh, okay, I can verify that the data that we use to generate that outcome is actually the right data. And it's enough data that we use as well, because that's an important piece of the AI challenge.
That's great. I mean, I'm familiar with one healthcare related example. So when Novartis first launched their CAR T for blood cancers. They were the first, to do that. What was really interesting is they had to collect cells from the patient in a hospital setting, and then
Mhm.
they had to go to I'll call it a manufacturing plant, a special kind of manufacturing plant, where the cells had to be, reformulated and mixed, and then the cells had to come back to the hospital and be reinfused back into the patient. And
Yeah.
so the blockchain technology was used at the time. What we called it was for custodial purposes, right? So that we had a custodian, if you will, that was the term that we used, that was tracking that patient's sample the whole time that it was outside of the body as it came back, to make sure it was the same sample, to make sure that it was, mixed the right way, to make
Yeah.
sure that the cells that left the patient actually were the cells that came back into the patient. And I remember thinking that, how would we have done that effectively if it hadn't been for blockchain? It would have been some really rudimentary ways of tagging and following a patient's cell through the system.
Yeah, and you would have to trust a bunch of people as opposed to a single platform and providing you that level of trust, right? So that's
Yes,
that's, that's the
that's
innovation. Yeah.
yeah. So, Eric, let's talk about the disruption. There are new business models that are developing around blockchain and by blockchain and with blockchain. So, can you comment on what you're seeing?
Well, so I think the beginning is decentralization, right? So when you think of pick one business model that you're familiar with, guarantee you it is a central business model. With meaning there is a central party at the center of that business model who's controlling some kind of flow, right? Whether it's life science, like you mentioned, whether it's supply chain, in the context of a car manufacturer, usually the trusted party is the car manufacturer, the actual company making the car, right? That's going to be the reference of trust. When you move into a decentralized world where you don't need to appoint someone, a company, to become that trusted party, you come up with very, very different business models, right? Or you can find business models where you actually don't need that third party anymore. The example I was using earlier about payments, the very exciting piece about Bitcoin was that I can finally exchange something of value with someone on the other side of the planet without the need of any kind of validation, control, or anything. I just decide to send Bitcoin to someone else across the globe. That's it. No one else has to be involved. And that's why I started to be involved in blockchain, because I realized that innovation alone is going to change the world, because now you don't need what we've been having for centuries, is a central authority to provide that trust layer. Now you don't need that anymore. The technology gives that to you. So I gave some examples already, but those decentralized business models are really interesting. You and I worked on what we used to call HealthPass. HealthPass was the ability for an individual to collect data about their own health, right? So from the hospital, from the physician, from the lab, from your radiologist, from your balance, from your Apple Watch, from your whatever it is. You collect all of that into a single place. This is your data because it's actually you. It's your data, and then you decide how you're going to share this data with someone else. Whether it's a doctor because you need a surgery, whether it's an emergency, you need to share your status, your medication, but you are in control of this information. Today you don't. Today no one has access to this information. It's not even centralized, right? Because anytime you go somewhere, you have to start again, right? You have to get another X-ray because the X-ray that you did 2 months ago is not available, or because it's not accessible to you. By having blockchain technologies, you can actually say, I am, as an individual, going to collect this data, and when I share it, the recipient of that data, it has a guarantee that I did not alter that information before I share it. So you can trust that information because that information has not been tampered with. And that's a huge value. That's why typically you get another lab test or another X-ray, because people don't trust whatever was done 2 months ago. Now you can. And so we actually built that when we were together, at IBM, and it was a very good case of using a decentralized business model to provide value to individuals, but also trust to the entire ecosystem, to the entire industry.
Yeah, and that idea of getting rid of the middleman, I guess I'll call it, also is a cost saving aspect.
For sure, efficiency, cost savings.
Yeah.
People don't die. It's as crazy as that, right? Because how many? I don't have the numbers in mind anymore, but the number of people who actually die in the world because of lack of access to the information at the right time is tremendous. And with a solution like this, you could actually mitigate that risk, right? Maybe not eliminate, but you can mitigate the risk dramatically, because you can decide to share that information that you already have as a patient with whoever is taking care of you in real time. And that to me is a really big change.
Yeah. Eric, let's talk for just a moment about collaboration models. I know when we were preparing for this, it's very apparent that in the world of blockchain, this Hedera is open source, and that's really important to innovation and getting technology widespread. So maybe you can just comment on the collaboration aspects of blockchain.
Yeah, I would say you have a lot of different ways to talk about collaboration in the world of blockchain, and maybe we use 3 different layers, right? The base layer is those blockchain are operated technically by what we call different nodes, and they not all the nodes operate the same exact way, right? And they trust each other to communicate. So that's a technology piece, a technology platform, and there is a blockchain without that, right? That doesn't exist. Blockchain doesn't exist if you don't have this concept of collaborating at the technical level. We had that in the past. Before blockchain, we had systems like that, right? I'm thinking about DNS, for example, the naming service for the internet, right? When you type google.com, you get an IP address, and that system is actually quite decentralized, not extremely decentralized, but people trust each other and they operate the technology. We don't even see that. So that system does not work without decentralization, right? So that's the first one. The second one is, in my example of Hyundai earlier, the manufacturer of cars having their suppliers, you have to collaborate with everybody. You have to convince your supply chain partners, to jump onto that platform to participate in the trust layer. Because if you don't, then the value of that platform is limited. So the collaboration is a must. You cannot operate at the business level if you don't have that level of collaboration with your business partners, right? So that's another layer of collaboration. And I think what's interesting too is, because we are building a new industry, or we have been doing that for 10 years about, you have to collaborate with a lot of other companies to build the industry, right? So you cannot expect, someone to say, I'm going to build, highways, and there is no one building bridges, pit stop, gas station, restaurants, any of that, right? You just build the highways. It's not going to work. You have to convince an ecosystem to build with you, right? So it's very similar to the physical infrastructure. In the blockchain infrastructure, you have to do the same thing. You have to convince people to help you bridge. You have to have wallets. You have to have your tokens have to be listed on exchanges, right? Coinbase being the biggest in the US. That requires a lot of collaboration, because without that collaboration, you also don't exist, right? So that's why if you like, if you're an integrator, if you like connecting people, if you're a collaborator, a mindset, this is the perfect word for you, because you have to do that at the technical layer, at the business layer, and at the ecosystem layer.
That's a great example of how you build that up at those 3 layers. Very good.
Yeah.
And then just finally, to kind of wrap things up, talk a little bit about the leadership skills that are required to again, advance a new technology, new business models, new ecosystems. There's so much that's new around all of this. How have you found your leadership skills to developing in order to enable all of this change?
It's a very deep question. And I think all of us are on a journey when it comes to leadership and how you adjust your style and such. But I think what's unique here is collaboration we just talked about. So if your leadership style is not collaboration, that's going to be really hard because it's all based on collaboration, right? And consensus. It's actually the technical word for what we agree to do as a network is called a consensus, right? So you have to have that mindset of being a consensus builder. That's number one, I think, and it does require work because, as I said earlier, typically we've been operating in a central authority world where you work for a company who gives direction to their constituents and they are in control, right? Here it's a little bit different. The second one is maybe a little bit controversial, but typically in a business world, you generate revenue and you spend that money to grow, right? You raise money with venture capitalists or with investors or whatever, then you generate revenue, then you spend that money to grow. In our industry, if you have a cryptocurrency, most of the time you actually create the cryptocurrency at the beginning and you provide an ecosystem to create value out of that cryptocurrency. So you create the money first and then you spend it, which is very different from any business model we've been thinking about before, right? It's a very unique. So you have to embrace that. And what it means is you have to embrace that from a concept point of view, but also from a day-to-day management point of view, right? Because many people on our teams are younger professionals, and that's all they know. That's all they know. They know that at the beginning we create the money and then we spend the money. And I'm coming from an older generation, and I'm like, that's not really how the real world works, right? So you have to adjust a little bit to that. And I'm not saying we are wrong and we are right and they're wrong, or vice versa. It's just a different world, a different way of thinking, right? So your leadership style has to adjust, I think, to that as well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's an interesting concept to get one's head around. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Eric, I want to thank you for spending this half hour with us and all of our viewers. You've helped us understand more about blockchain as a technology, the innovation that's going into Hedera with the council and how you're actually improving it. Looked at some interesting use cases across finances and supply chain and even customer engagement. Helped us understand its impact on business models, the 3 layers of being able to collaborate around blockchain, and then finally the agility and innovation that's required to be a leader in this industry, because you're really upending a lot of sacred cows about how we think about money and transactions and creating value. So it's been a fascinating half hour, and we thank you for being one of our Innovators Circle and sharing this with us. And we look forward to probably touching base with you sometime maybe toward the end of the year and finding out how Hashgraph is proceeding and what's new in the world of Hedera.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for having me, Lorraine. And good luck with all your endeavors. I really enjoyed the book that you shared with me. It was last year, I think. And I'm sure I'm going to enjoy the next one too.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure.